You can tell a good director in about 5 minutes. Doesn't take longer. If you've been around at all, you spot a director in 5 minutes.
Richard Widmark wasn't just another actor. He was a true legend of classic Hollywood. His powerful performances helped shape the golden age of cinema. However, behind the fame lay a man who faced numerous struggles. From a small town in Minnesota to the bright lights of Hollywood, his journey was anything but easy. Do you know what Richard Widmark went through to reach success? If not, you're in the right place. Hey, my name is Mr. Heyman, and today we will talk about Richard Widmark names the 5 actors he hated the most. But before we begin, if you're a fan of Richard Widmark or love old Western movies, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share amazing stories about Western stars and classic Hollywood icons. Richard Widmark was born in the small town of Sunrise, Minnesota, but his family didn't stay there long. Within a year, they moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where his father, Carl Henry Widmark, had started a new job as a traveling salesman. Not long after the move, Richard's mother, Ethel May, gave birth to his younger brother, Donald, on July 25, 1918. The two brothers quickly became close and stayed that way throughout their lives. Richard often credited his love for movies to his Scottish grandmother, who was a big fan of cowboy star Tom Mix. She would take young Richard to the cinema 2 or even 3 times a week, starting when he was just 4 years old, sparking a passion that would stay with him forever. The family moved around frequently because of Carl's work, but they eventually settled down in Princeton, Illinois. There, Carl bought a bakery and named it Henry's Bakery. The family lived in the apartment above the shop, finally finding a place they could call home. Richard Widmark went to Princeton High School, where he was a bright student, played football, and even became class president in his senior year. But during his junior year, his parents, Carl and Ethel, separated. Ethel stayed in Princeton to raise Richard and his brother until they graduated. Richard finished high school in 1932 and went on to Lake Forest College on a scholarship, planning to become a lawyer. While at Lake Forest, Richard continued playing football and placed 3rd in a statewide speech contest. He also got involved in college plays, though he was shy to admit he liked acting. He feared people would think it was sissy. But his passion for the stage quickly grew. The biggest change came when he met Ora Jean Hazelwood, a fellow drama student with dreams of acting too. She would become the love of his life. Richard graduated in 1936 and was asked to stay at Lake Forest to help with drama and speech classes. He stayed for 2 years, but in 1938 he packed his bags and headed to New York City for a shot at radio, thanks to a friend's offer. Coincidentally, Jean Hazelwood was also in New York, studying at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Richard soon landed roles in radio dramas, including Aunt Jenny's real-life stories, and his career took off as he rushed between studios. On April 5, 1942, just a few months after the U.S. entered World War II, Richard and Jean got married in her hometown of Evanston, Illinois. Richard always said he never even flirted with another woman after meeting Jean. "I happen to like my wife a lot," he once said. Their marriage lasted 55 years, free of any Hollywood scandal. Richard tried to join the military during the war, but he was rejected due to a perforated eardrum. Meanwhile, his brother Donald was drafted and sent to Europe. In 1943, tragedy struck when Donald's plane was shot down over the Netherlands. He was the only one from his crew to survive and spent over a year in a German prison camp. Though he made it home, his health never recovered. He suffered severe headaches and, in 1951, became partially paralyzed. Sadly, on December 22, 1955, Donald passed away from a brain tumor at just 37 years old. Richard did everything he could to care for his brother and often said the government failed to understand how much Donald was truly suffering. Back in 1943, while Richard Widmark and his wife Jean were worried about Jean's brother Donald making it through the war, Richard was starting to build his career. He made his Broadway debut in Kiss and Tell and began performing for American troops with the American Theater Wing. By then, Richard was already earning well from radio and stage work. In 1945, Richard and Jean welcomed their only child, Anne Heath Widmark, born on July 25th. Soon after, Richard got a life-changing offer from 20th Century Fox executive Darryl F. Zanuck. He was asked to play a violent killer named Tommy Udo in Kiss of Death, starring Victor Mature. But the film's director, Henry Hathaway, didn't think Richard fit the role. He believed Richard looked too smart, with his high forehead, to be a convincing killer. However, Zanuck insisted, and Richard got the part. Hathaway wasn't happy and made filming difficult for him. Richard only wanted the role because it was being shot in New York. Surprisingly, this was his very first movie. And in the very first scene he ever filmed, he made a chilling impression. As Tommy Udo, he famously pushed an elderly woman in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs and gave a wild, creepy laugh that would go down in movie history. That scene earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor and won him a Golden Globe as the most promising male newcomer. Richard joked, "I thought this acting thing was easy. I haven't won anything since." He also admitted that when he saw himself on screen for the first time, he was horrified and said he felt like shooting himself. But audiences were hooked. They loved to hate his character, and Fox gave him a 7-year contract, even though he had originally signed a bad deal just to land the Tommy Udo role. In 1948, he starred in Yellow Sky alongside Gregory Peck and Ann Baxter. That same year, he also appeared in Roadhouse with Celeste Holm and The Street with No Name with Lloyd Nolan and Barbara Lawrence. The following year, in 1949, he acted in Down to the Sea in Ships with Lionel Barrymore. By 1950, the studio gave him 2 big projects. The first was Panic in the Streets, directed by Elia Kazan, an old Broadway friend who had actually encouraged Richard to audition for Kiss of Death back in 1947. Though the film featured stars like Jack Palance and Zero Mostel, it flopped financially, mostly because it was filmed on location in New Orleans, which made it too expensive. Next, Richard starred in No Way Out, a racially charged drama with Sidney Poitier and Linda Darnell. Richard played a racist named Ray Biddle, a role he didn't want to take. The studio forced him to do it. After each intense scene, Richard would apologize to Poitier and say, "Sid, you know this is just acting, right?" Poitier reassured him and said, "Dick, I get it. I'm an actor too." They became close friends, and Sidney later said Richard was the first person in Hollywood to invite him to dinner, an act of kindness that meant the world to him at the time. Before exploring the rest of Richard Widmark's life, let's talk about the main topic of the video. In 1951, Richard Widmark appeared in Halls of Montezuma, a World War II film set on a Japanese-held island. He starred alongside his old radio friend, Carl Malden, as well as Jack Palance, Richard Boone, and a young Robert Wagner, who earned his first credited role in this film. The next year, in 1952, Widmark shared the screen with Marilyn Monroe in Don't Bother to Knock. Richard once described Marilyn as a fragile soul, like a wounded bird. She desperately wanted fame, but was terrified of everything around her. She often hid in her dressing room for hours, and by late afternoon, the crew would beg her to come out so they could finally go home. She struggled to remember her lines, and during filming, you'd think her performance was a mess. But once the film was edited and up on the big screen, she looked amazing. Despite rumors that Marilyn often had flings with her co-stars, Richard said, "Not with me. She didn't even flirt." In 1954, he worked again with Robert Wagner, this time alongside Spencer Tracy in Broken Lance. This film marked the end of Widmark's 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. At 40 years old, he felt it was time for a change. He was exhausted from jumping from one movie to the next without a break. More importantly, he believed he could earn better money as an independent actor. His daughter Anne shared that her father was always a family man who preferred quiet life at home. Around this time, Richard and his family were living on a peaceful ranch in the San Fernando Valley. Wanting more creative control, Widmark launched his own production company, naming it Heath Productions, after Anne's middle name. But 1956 brought personal heartbreak. His dear mother, Ethel May, passed away just 1 year after the death of his brother Donald. Though Widmark rarely spoke publicly about his Hollywood rivals, insiders and co-stars over the years have whispered about the actors who rubbed him the wrong way. Whether it was their ego, their laziness, or their showboating, Widmark had little patience for those who didn't take acting as seriously as he did. And according to those who knew him well, there were 5 actors he just couldn't stand, no matter how famous they were. Number 1, Frank Sinatra. The chairman of the board may have charmed the world, but he didn't impress Richard Widmark. The two worked together on The Detective in 1968, and the experience reportedly left Widmark fuming. Sinatra's casual attitude toward the craft, his habit of showing up late, and his demand to shoot scenes quickly with little preparation were the polar opposite of Widmark's disciplined approach. One crew member later said, "Richard thought Frank was all charisma, no commitment. To Widmark, acting was sacred. To Sinatra, it seemed like just another gig." Number 2, Marlon Brando. Widmark had mixed feelings about Brando. He acknowledged the younger actor's talent, even brilliance, but couldn't stand his method acting antics. Brando's unpredictable behavior, his refusal to memorize lines, and his constant improvisation irritated Widmark to no end. While they never worked together directly, Widmark was once quoted as saying, "Some actors need chaos to create. I prefer focus." That subtle jab, many believed, was aimed squarely at Brando. Number 3, Tony Curtis. During the filming of The Long Ships in 1964, Widmark and Curtis were co-stars, but far from friends. Curtis was known for his vanity, often spending more time in the makeup chair than with the script. He treated the set like a fashion show, while Widmark came ready to work. Their behind-the-scenes tension was noticeable to everyone. One production assistant claimed, "Widmark didn't hate Curtis for who he was, but for who he pretended to be." To Widmark, Curtis was more style than substance. Number 4, Robert Mitchum, laid back, boozy, and famously indifferent. Mitchum was Hollywood's cool cat, but to Widmark, that nonchalance bordered on disrespect. Mitchum often bragged about how little he prepared for roles, once saying, "I just show up, hit my mark, and say the lines." Widmark, who treated every role like a battle to be won, found this attitude infuriating. Although the two appeared in the same era of films, their philosophies couldn't have been more different. "You don't coast through greatness," Widmark once muttered to a friend after watching Mitchum on screen. Number 5, Kirk Douglas, perhaps the most shocking name on the list. Both were tough, intense, and commanding actors. But maybe that was the problem. Too much alike. Widmark thought Douglas was a scene stealer, constantly trying to upstage others. His booming voice, theatrical expressions, and need to dominate every frame rubbed Widmark the wrong way. There were rumors that Widmark once turned down a major role opposite Douglas, saying, "There's only room for one storm in a scene, and Kirk brings the whole hurricane." Despite these personal grievances, Richard Widmark kept things professional on the surface. He was never the kind of man to air dirty laundry in public or feed gossip columns. But those close to him say he believed that actors had a responsibility to the audience, to the script, and to each other. When someone disrespected that, whether through ego or laziness, he took it personally. In 1957, Richard Widmark starred alongside Richard Basehart and June Lockhart in Time Limit. Just a year later, he appeared with Doris Day and Gig Young in The Tunnel of Love. That same year, he also teamed up with Robert Taylor and Patricia Owens for The Law and Jake Wade. By then, Widmark had become a familiar face and a well-known name in Hollywood. When someone asked him if fame had affected his privacy, he simply said, "I don't care how well-known an actor is, he can live a normal life if he wants to." In 1960, Widmark took on the role of Jim Bowie in John Wayne's production of The Alamo. Interestingly, Wayne originally wanted him to play Colonel William Travis, not Bowie. He even told the 5'10" Widmark, "You're not big enough to play Jim Bowie." But Widmark confidently replied, "I will be," and he proved it. The following year in 1961, Widmark starred in the Western Two Road Together with James Stewart and Shirley Jones. He shared that most of the time on set, director John Ford and Jimmy Stewart were busy arguing, mainly about the old beat-up cowboy hat Stewart insisted on wearing, a hat he'd used in several other westerns. Despite the behind-the-scenes tension, Shirley Jones later admitted that Richard Widmark was the only leading man she ever truly fell in love with. "He and Stewart were both so kind and protective of me," she said. "Though nothing ever came of my feelings, maybe that's why I loved him." That same year, Widmark also played the American prosecutor in Judgment at Nuremberg, starring alongside legends like Spencer Tracy and Burt Lancaster. In 1962, he joined a powerhouse cast including John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Gregory Peck, Debbie Reynolds, Carol Baker, and Henry Fonda in the epic film How the West Was Won. The movie had a massive $15 million budget, but went on to earn the studio over $50 million. By 1964, Widmark and his wife Jean were enjoying life on their peaceful 20-acre estate in Connecticut. In 1966, he returned to the screen with Alvarez Kelly, a Civil War drama co-starring William Holden and Janice Rule. The following year, he starred in The Way West with Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas. Sadly, just 2 years after Alvarez Kelly, Widmark received heartbreaking news. His father, Carl, had passed away in New Orleans at the age of 70. In 1974, Richard Widmark appeared in Murder on the Orient Express, alongside stars like Lauren Bacall and many others. Later, in 1982, he acted in Hanky Panky, a film directed by his friend Sidney Poitier, and starred alongside Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner. By 1987, at the age of 72, Widmark admitted that filmmaking no longer excited him. He said, "I've realized in my old age that making movies just irritates me. I've only got a few years left, and I don't want to spend 12 hours on set just to shoot 2 minutes of footage." Throughout his career, Widmark appeared in over 70 films, far too many to list, but he was especially known for his roles in westerns. That same year, in an interview with Parade magazine, he shared a bizarre story. A woman once slapped him in the street, calling him a little squirt, while another time, a large man knocked him right out of his chair at a restaurant. "This acting business is something else," he laughed. When asked if he was smart with money like some stars who lost it all, Widmark joked, "No, I'm just cheap." In February 1990, at age 75, he received one of his highest honors, the D.W. Griffith Lifetime Achievement Award. His longtime friend Sidney Poitier presented it to him. Widmark was touched and said, "Sid, I can't believe you came all the way to California just for this." Poitier replied, "For you, Dick, I would have walked." But that same year brought heartbreak. Richard's beloved wife, Jean, was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. After her diagnosis, he stepped away from acting to care for her full-time. He only returned once more, in 1991, for the film True Colors with John Cusack and Imogene Stubbs, just to fulfill a commitment. The next 7 years were deeply painful for Richard and their daughter Anne, as they watched Jean slowly fade away. On March 2, 1997, Jean passed away from Alzheimer's in Santa Barbara, California, leaving behind a grieving family and a husband who had devoted everything to her in her final years. Just a few months after Jean passed away, Richard decided to sell their beloved 80-acre ranch in Hidden Valley. Without her, it just didn't feel the same. Then 2.5 years later, on September 27, 1999, Richard, who was 84 at the time, married 71-year-old actress Susan Blanchard, a longtime family friend. Richard once said Susan had always been kind to John. The couple settled down in Roxbury, Connecticut. In 2002, Richard was honored with an induction into the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, a proud moment in his later years. But by 2007, his health had started to decline, and a fractured vertebra only made things worse. On March 24, 2008, at the age of 93, Richard Widmark passed away peacefully at his home in Roxbury. Friends remembered him as a gentle and honorable man, and fittingly, he left the world just as he had lived, quietly.